Welcome to Conveyancing Matters, when this week we are talking to Deputy Chief Land Registrar Mike Harlow. Welcome to Conveyancing Matters with Lorraine and Stu. Join us for a chat about all things property.
So, welcome to another episode of Conveyancing Matters. Today we've got a really special guest. It's Mike Harlow. Hi, Mike. How you doing?
I'm all right, thank you. Thanks for having me back on.
No
I think you
problem.
said beforehand it's 3 years since we had a chat.
2 years,
Two.
Mike.
2 years, right?
2 years. That's it. Yeah.
Yeah,
I
it
can't,
feels-
I can't believe the time has raced on to that extent, though, Mike. I have to say, 2 years since we were last here. It's quite shocking.
It's unbelievable. Time flies when you're having fun, as they say.
Doesn't it just? Doesn't it just? So, Stu, well, I'll hand over to you first. We thought we might jump in with perhaps something that's a very great interest to conveyancers, but maybe a bit sensitive for the land reg. So
Yeah, I suppose it's jumping in at the deep end only because it's obviously in the news. It's the potential strike. So obviously we appreciate, Mike. You might not be able to go into uber detail, but we've obviously seen in the press what's potentially on the horizon. The PCS union mooting, I think it's Tuesday, the 21st of January. So it'd be helpful if maybe you could give us a bit of background on what might be happening.
Yes. So the industrial action is around sort of three topics: office attendance, the number of days a week that people are expected to be in the office, the use of data to kind of talk to individuals about performance as part of the conversation about their individual performance, and on a kind of relatively techie thing called what we call the classification guide, which is all about how we make sure that people with certain experience and qualifications are sort of checking off technical points on casework. The industrial action that is proposed at the moment is action short of a strike, as it work to rule, I think is the sort of common term. We have had industrial action in the past and have obviously dealt with very significant disruptions in things like COVID, when all the offices shut and we had to set people up and working from home. And all throughout that, our first priority is to make sure that we keep the property market moving. Those pre-completion services are the ones that we know matter most, so that people can actually move home, and putting their application in, getting that submitted, and making sure that thereafter that transaction is secure. That's what we've always been able to prioritize, even through COVID. None of that ever stopped, even through the kind of very beginnings of that. And we have a very practiced way of dealing with those sorts of disruptions. So we're as confident as we can be that this is not going to impact the way the market works on a day-to-day basis. We continue to talk to the unions as you would expect, and try and find the sort of earliest resolution that we can. So I give you the sort of strongest assurance that I can, that I, particularly in light of the fact that I know there are SDLG changes coming up at the end of March, and I suspect some people are thinking generally about how busy things might get around that time. I'm interested in your views on whether you think that's just going to be a sort of a crunch moment where this year's work gets piled up into one place, rather than whether it's going to actually create more work in total for the year. But we're as confident as we can be that normal service that you need from us to get those transactions over the line will be maintained throughout.
I think that's really good news, because I think the initial concern when I saw this was, of course, our pre-completion searches, and coming back from the winter break, with sort of January, February, and March looking like they're going to be heavy on completions. It was the fear that will the land registry be operational, and will it affect conveyancers on a day-to-day basis? So hopefully that will provide everyone with some comfort.
Yeah, I honestly, I wouldn't worry about that.
Brilliant.
Stu, do you want to pick up Mike's point there then about the sort of impending impact of these stamp duty land tax changes the ban changes coming in at the end of March? What's your view?
Yeah, well, I think it's undeniable there's going to be an increase in transactions during the first quarter of this year. We've probably seen here maybe an increase of around 10% at the moment. I would suggest that will probably increase over the remainder of this month and potentially parts of February. But as you say, it's whether you're sort of pulling, part of your pipeline from the remainder of the year forward, isn't it? So whether it will have a big increase on the whole of the year, just isolating the stamp duty threshold, I'm not sure. I think more, that combined with, mortgage rates reducing and a bit more stability in the market, I think generally it's going to be busier this year than last. And I suppose leading on to that, that's maybe where a lot of conveyancers are going to have, again, maybe concerns regarding the time that registrations are taking. And perhaps, Mike, you could give us a bit of an update in terms of timescales. Obviously, they've come down since we last spoke, but there are still areas, particularly, first registrations where the delays are still substantial.
Yeah, so I mean, it's good to hear what you say about transactions. We very much keep our ear to the ground. We don't just sort of take in data from sources like lenders and the Bank of England, the sort of general economic data, but we also talk to conveyancing firms like yours and others just to get those early indications of what the interest is and whether that's converting into actual transactions. So that helps us plan and make sure that, as I was saying just now, that we're absolutely 100% able to respond to those urgent pre-completion needs, some of which obviously are also to expedite applications. If you have some prior registrations that need to be completed in order to complete that transaction, then the advice obviously is we can get those done quickly. We action 95% of them within 10 working days, and obviously if you need something super quick, then we will respond. Sometimes though, obviously those prior applications may have requisitions on them themselves, and when the person who wants the expedite is not always in control of how quickly other people respond to those requisitions. So if you see that as an issue, then get ahead of it would be our advice, and get the expedite request in early.
Mike, sorry, can I just ask you there, because I'm sure we talked about this last time, but on the expedites, and I'm sure this is a phrase I did use a couple of years ago, but is it not really, though, a case of sort of robbing Peter to pay Paul? Because if you're taking people from the frontline registrations and putting them onto the expedites, well, the frontline registrations aren't getting progressed because they're dealing with the expedites. And so actually, in reality, you don't move forward as fast as you wanted to, if at all. How does that actually work? That might be very simplistic on my part.
No, it's absolutely, it's a zero-sum game, right? If you've got 100 people, make the maths easy, doing a certain type, let's say we've got 100 people doing first registrations. If somebody wants to expedite something, but it's not at the front of the queue because we take the oldest case first, because and the reason we take the oldest case first, by the way, is may not be obvious, but the oldest case is, I mean, firstly, it's been waiting longest, it's just fair, but also it's the one that is more likely than all the others to cause problems, right? If it's older, when you go back to people and say, can I have a bit more information, can I check something, your people's knowledge is a bit faded. Somebody might have even left the firm, and it's also the one more likely to be expedited when somebody then has a follow-on transaction. So we always take the oldest case first, and if someone does want to expedite something that is younger, you're right. We have to take some capacity off those dealing with the oldest case. So it is really important that people play fair, because then they're only playing. They're not playing with Land Registry. They're playing with the other applicants. They're sort of so queue jumping is that it's not a dirty word if the queue jumping is for the right reason, which is actually my client needs these prior applications sorted because they have a real need. I mean, otherwise people are are sat there secure. The application's logged. So there's no legal insecurity. We're just waiting to process it. So it does really matter that people do it for the right reasons. But when they do have the right reasons, obviously it flips into doing it as soon as you can, right? Because the sooner you do it, the sooner you can see it processed and be confident that that there's a tick in the box for what needs to happen in order to be able to complete this transaction. So, and you also asked about speed of service generally. So for things that aren't urgent, so not being expedited, we have, and I can talk about the numbers of people we've recruited in recent times, 1,700, and the number of people we've trained, 2,500, etc. Where we are at the moment is we have the scale of capacity, if you like, in sheer numbers of people doing casework that we believe is the sort of steady state. It took a lot of effort and took a lot of our experienced caseworkers to recruit and train the people to build that capacity. So, we're very happy with the sort of size that we are at the moment, and the number of people who have come in, and the productivity and quality that they're gaining through training and experience. And as a result of that, I guess the headline is that we are confident that by the end of this financial year, in other words, by the end of March, our casework, the oldest cases, will be below 12 months and declining. And there's kind of two key sort of additional factors that I would kind of really want to be clear on. Firstly, obviously, our information services, the pre-completion services, have throughout this period never had an issue. They've been working in their usual way, and have enabled transactions and the market to tick over its normal pace. Expedites, very much the same story. There have been a lot of expedites, and that's understandable because as cases sit with Land Registry for a longer period of time, there's more need to expedite them. And as a result of doing a lot of expedites, as well as building our capacity, whilst the age of the very oldest cases has not been great and been problematic, and we're obviously sorry for that and we wish it weren't so, we have also been through expedites taking chunks out of the queue, if you like. So as the age of the oldest cases is coming down, and as I say, it will around the end of the year, we think it will be 12 months and under, the queue behind it is getting thinner, so that the speed with which we are able to reduce the age of the oldest case is actually accelerating. And with being the capacity that we think is now optimal, we're sort of confident, very confident that the decline in the age of the oldest case will gain pace and gain confidence as in the market as the year rolls on. We should remind ourselves as well that an awful lot of casework gets turned around pretty quickly. We have quite a bit of automated casework, an increasing amount of automated casework, and obviously the simpler cases we're able to kind of turn around more quickly anyway. So
maybe if I could put in there, Mike, it's because it's comforting to know that obviously the recruitment went well and you're now up to capacity and these times are coming down. But I think maybe to sort of bring a few subjects together, I think one of the concerns that I always have, that I find really difficult to explain to a client, is when we make an application to the Land Registry, and there's sometimes an inconsistency within the timeframes that they come back. So I have to admit, a lot of applications are coming back quicker. But equally, there doesn't seem to be that queue system. From sitting in my office when we make applications, it does seem to be more dependent on who maybe your application sits with as to sometimes how quick it may come back.
Yeah,
which is very frustrating when you get clients that may know each other, waiting, and the other one's got theirs back, and you get that question: well, how come Joe Bloggs has had theirs back then and I haven't had mine? kind of
Yeah.
sometimes very
So
difficult to get that point out.
yeah, so in the real world, as it were, a transaction is a transaction. Buying a home is buying a home. If you happen to be buying an unregistered home, that's
Granted,
that's
yeah.
nothing to do with the home buying choice, and so in our, I mean, we call them work streams. They're not services, because the service is enabling you to buy a home. The work stream depends on the technicalities of whether the property is registered or whether it's a transfer of part or a new lease or whatever. It's those that's what kind of dictates how many people we have to do it. And you might say, well, in which case, if everyone in an ideal world were trained on everything and able to do everything, then, well, brilliant. We would be able to make sure everyone got an even service, right? So the age of the oldest case across all our applications would be the golden rule, and therefore, there wouldn't be that disparity. The disparity comes from we haven't trained everyone on every case, because that would to be able to do every type of case, because that would take an awful lot of time, and actually we'd be even further behind as a result, and it's not necessary, and so excuse me, we have done a lot to make sure that we can flex some people across different work streams, and we're also very mindful of, as we get back to equilibrium, a reasonable speed of service, we need to make sure that we've got the right numbers with the right skills. We feel we're about there. It's just that at the moment, in the simpler stuff, it's already turning around more quickly. Simpler stuff for us. I mean, it's the complexity of the transaction for you and for your customers is dependent on all sorts of other things. But for us, it may be simpler, and therefore, at the moment, we're able to turn that stuff around faster.
Of interest, Mike, is there sort of parity with law firms insofar as recruitment of staff is across the conveyancing industry has been very difficult, and also staff retention is now becoming a very topical issue. So maybe tying that in with what's happening, is that a similar sort of thing at the Land Registry?
I mean, it may be part of where our offices are. We've always had a lot of interest in jobs. I think we offer a really interesting and potentially quite long-term career. I think people, to be honest, I'm not sure everyone who applies for a job at Land Registry necessarily knows what Land Registry does initially. And I think most people who come into the organisation go, when I speak to them after being here for about 6 months, they go, it's way more interesting than I thought it would be. They sort of see it initially as maybe it's some sort of rubber stamping administrative job, but as actually, because there's all of life in owning properties, and all of life's messiness and all the interesting messiness of medieval property law, actually the more you get into it, the more you see it's quite hard and quite intellectually challenging at times. So I think it is an attractive career. People come in often thinking, it's a relatively administrative job, but maybe a kind of good employer, and then start to see that they can sort of stretch their legs and challenge themselves, and find increasing interest in the roles that are open to them.
Mike, if I can just go back to the time frame thing, I don't want to, hang on this too much, but I think we can accept that, first registrations, transfers apart, first registrations of leases are, of course, the more complex matters. But I think what I was still quite surprised about on the Land Registry's own stats, and to be fair, probably my naivety really, but by your own stats, on existing registered titles, you get 369,000 applications a month, which of course is a lot by anybody's standards. But I think I was still surprised, Mike, that only 30% of those appear to be turned around quickly, and some, such as changing a name or transferring a property title, can take 12 weeks, and with most completed in 5 months. And I think I think that's the thing, that's the stat that I was sort of struggling with, really, Mike. If we perceive that a registered title is simpler, and I think, to be completely fair to the Land Reg, this is where firms have to take some responsibility in terms of requisitions, and I'm very happy to say that. So in a sense, Mike, so you don't have to. But what do you have a feel for in terms of registered titles? Because I think that's clearly the majority. That's where conveyancing firms would say, gosh, why is the Land Reg taking more than 12 weeks to process a registered title?
Yeah, I mean, we just state the very obvious. It's not taking us 12 weeks of work to process it. It's that there is a queue at the moment that means that we don't get to it for 12 weeks. And that is, that making sure that we are, investing enough in the oldest cases, the ones that are complex, but it's more about they're also the oldest. We should be prioritizing those oldest cases because in the real world, people need those back just as much as they need the simple cases back. It's not the real world doesn't care whether the case is simple or complex. It wants the registration completed. It wants the register up to date and wants to move on. So it is. I know it sort of slightly plays out oddly, but we are trying our best to be even in the way that we bring the queues back down to where they should be, and in so doing, are allowing some things to take slightly longer, 12 weeks, for a relatively simple application, so that they all kind of finish. They all kind of get back to where they should be at the same time, if that makes sense. But the kind of nuance there is, if we were totally even-handed, we would actually have to train a lot of people to do things that once we got on top of them, actually we didn't need to do anymore. So if that makes sense. So there are some trade-offs in making sure that we are actually being as efficient and as fast in bringing down the service times as quickly as we can.
And on the back of that, Mike, because actually the thing that prompted our discussion a couple of years ago was frankly a bit of controversy around the narrative in relation to land registry requisitions and conveyancing firms. And I think it's absolutely fair to say, certainly as a trainer, from what I see, the land registry has really, I think, focused very hard on training resource, freely available training resource, videos, the whole 9 yards, on the Land Registry's website. And I have to say, if firms aren't taking, webinars, and if firms aren't taking advantage of that, then, well, that's their shout, and they should be going to the registry's website to see what's available, because I think it's, very considerable. But do you have a feel, Mike, and I realise you're across the organisation, so every stat isn't going to be available, but do you have a feel that requisitions and the rate of requisitions, is that improving as a result of the training you're putting out there?
Yeah, it is. So, I mean, requisitions is sort of grit in the machine. It's painful for everybody. Simon Law, I'm sure you know Simon, chair of the Society of Conveyancers, Licensed Conveyancers. He did an excellent blog talking about the kind of cost to the industry, the cost to business of making simple mistakes like variations in names. Submitting an application where the name is, it's Anne with an E in the mortgage, Anne without an E in the transfer, and then Anne with in E again in the application, and that happens 114,000 times last year. So we call those avoidable requisitions, and they are.
To be frank, Mike, I'd call it sloppy conveyancing. I'd be prepared to call it sloppy conveyancing. I appreciate the Land Reg wouldn't. I mean, I personally say that's pretty unforgiving. But there we go.
I think the thing that is, what Simon says in his blog is kind of super helpful, because it's about recognizing that we all gain. There is business sense as well as the importance of making sure that handover of information to Land Registry before we put it in the register and then guarantee it, £8 trillion worth of guaranteed property ownership. It's really important for the health of the system, confidence in property ownership, that that handover of information is secure. But I want to thank the law firms. There is a lot of engagement in doing that, and I think for the reasons Simon sets out, we've been, as you say, we've offered lots of training. There's top 10. I can't even say it. Top 10 tips for tip-top applications on our training hub. I don't know why we set it up as a tongue twister, but anyway, if you Google Land Registry's training hub, it'll take you to .gov.uk pages. But there are live events too. We've had webinars in recent months, and literally thousands of people have turned up to them. I think we trained about 3,000 people in just the last few months of 2024. We've got another 850 booked in for our next event. So thank you. There's lots of people who, are when understanding the benefit to them, the benefit to the system and to our efficiency, are taking the opportunity of, kind of brushing up on what works and what helps. So, and we are seeing the numbers coming down. Now, they're not symmetrical. There are some firms that are all over this and are doing, brilliantly, and there's the best that they can, really, for their own benefit as well as ours. But there are variations out there. That's for certain. And there's more that we can do, and there's more that we are doing, and actually casework system providers are doing, in order to help people avoid that in the first place. Because we all know the forms that we've used online where you type something in, or these days when you go in and say, I'm going to transfer this money to this person with this sort code and this bank account, helpfully it says actually there isn't somebody with that name and those credentials, and that sort of self-checking application process can help avoid to a degree the and with an E and without an E. And we're working with casework systems, casework providers who are, piloting ways of, cross-checking that. We have got our own validation checks that we're increasingly introducing into the application process that you will do through Portal, and there'll be more of that. So there's more sort of systematizing out of those errors. But that doesn't take away the need and the responsibility on all of us to kind of make sure we're getting it right first time.
Well, that leads, I think, quite nicely, Mike, into the D word, because of course lots of discussion about the digitisation of the conveyancing process, and I think that word is bandied around a lot, but specifically in relation to land registry and land registration, Mike, what does that mean for land registration, and sort of where is the land registry along that road, and as I say, what does it mean for property ownership and lawyers and lenders?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. Which is,
I've not got time for it.
Because let's start with why, right? So digitization is, sounds like a good thing, because it sounds like it's going to make things easy. But what is it that you need to make easier, I think, would be the sort of question I would start with. And the answer to that, I think, is fairly obvious, which is the process of buying a property, right? So because it is not very easy, and in other parts of the world it's still not hugely easy, because it's a responsible thing, and people have to go carefully and be thoughtful in their commitment. But it is a darn sight easier. I was still staggered by the answer when I asked my sort of equivalent in the Norwegian Land Registry, what is the average time to buying a property in Norway? And she said 3 weeks. And I said, 3 weeks to register it? She said, no, 3 weeks from putting it on the market to moving in. I said, that's the average. So that takes into account finding a buyer, finding a lawyer, getting it processed. And I said, so what's the difference? And she said, well, everyone, and this took years, by the way, this wasn't by accident. Everyone knows everything you could need to know about the property when it goes on the market. And so the sort of waiting around to find more information, finding more information, possibly being a hook for buyer's regret and changing minds, and it disappears. And there are zero chains. And the reason there are zero chains is because it's circular. It only takes 3 weeks to put your property on the market and sell it on average. So therefore, if you bought a property and committed, you don't want to hook the two up. So, I mean, there are people who will say, well, there are differences between Norway and the UK. But for me, the two fundamental things that Land Registry and others can contribute to there are availability and accessibility of information, and then supporting the process thereafter in making it slick and secure. And so digitization therefore has two components, both the data and the process.
I think the thing is, though, Mike, sorry to cut across you there, and Stu and I have talked about this a lot, and to be fair, you might not be prepared to make that much of a comment, but of course what has happened since we last met, of course, is the material information requirements and trading standards, and and let's be blunt, the Law Society's efforts with the property information form, none of which of course has got anything to do with the Land Registry, but everything to do with how the process runs. And I think the reality is, more information up front is inarguable, really unarguable. That kind of makes sense. But these sort of attempts to sort of recast the conveyancing process and actually shift effectively, the legal work onto the estate agents and expose sellers to, the risk of misrepresentation. Well, it's something we've talked a lot about, Stu, isn't it?
I love a lot. Yeah, absolutely. And also going back to sort of conveyancing processes in different countries. We did a series of conveyancing around the world a year or so ago, and we thought we were going to come up with some gems. We thought we could change the whole of the way the UK conveyancing system works, and we thought we'd have the answer to everything. But what the main thing that transpired from those conversations was that there were simply so many cultural differences in countries that actually one system wouldn't fit another. And people's appetite for information was seemingly completely different in maybe, say, Africa as opposed to England. And of course, again, the way banks work are totally different. So I think changing systems is something that is probably a bit more fanciful than in terms of comparables with other countries, as it's just such a cultural difference.
So I would pare it back and say, whatever the ways of working are today, if you enable people to change their ways of working by making the information that is not particularly accessible at the moment really easily accessible, then so much I think can follow from that. Because I think that Lorraine, your point about material information, there's an issue in there, which is the reason it is quite hard to see how that works brilliantly is because one of the questions it needs to answer is, who is getting that information? Who is pulling it together? If the answer was to that was, that is the simplest thing in the world, because all you need to do is, put a postcode and an address or a lasso on a map, and then it's all immediately available, that falls away. So that, that sort of cultural question or professional question of, who's responsible and, and who's pulling this together and where does that leave liability? If the information all came from the primary source, if it was all, could all be, pushed around the system in a completely trusted, undiluted way, and was instantly available for next to no money, then so much becomes so much easier simply from that. So from our point of view, what we are about, and what we have already been on the journey towards, and are talking to the sector about, is our contribution to that is digitizing the data that we do have as fast as we can, although it is it's always a big project. See local land charges for how long it takes to digitize many millions of records that have been recorded in loads of different ways, microfiche and all sorts of things over several hundred local authorities. But that's what Norway kind of taught us, really, is yes, there are differences in the way that markets work, But the input, the biggest important input, is digital data that everyone needs, everyone can access, and in a way that, you know, works so you can layer it all on top. So it's called QFAIR. So it's findable, it's accessible, it's interoperable with other data, and you can reuse it in the process. So that's kind of thing one, really, is you know, heavy lifting, heavy investment in the digitization of the information that we hold and that local authorities hold in the local land charges.
I think the L word there, though, Mike, is the thing that interests conveyancers probably most. Yeah. Clearly, that of liability. And again, I think the problem with this debate actually is that if somebody like me, and I'm not clearly suggesting this about you, but if somebody like me sort of tries to sort of push the envelope to kind of challenge the thinking, that doesn't mean that then someone like me is against the principle. It's just, well, okay, actually, how is this going to work? And I think conveyancers are most interested because they tend to seemingly underwrite much of the conveyancing process with their professional indemnity insurance. You know, where will liability lie if something goes wrong, if, you know, this data is hacked, etc., etc. Frankly, you know, government hasn't shown itself at being, you know, that marvelous at you know, holding data, retaining data, keeping it safe or not being hacked. And I guess it's that sort of confidence that the you know, the conveyancing community would need. You know, where does liability lie if something goes wrong, or if something's, you know, available for hackers? And it sounds like a simplistic question, and I accept it probably is, but I think the L word, I think liability is the key really for a lot of people.
Yeah, and I think there are, not getting too deep into the technologies, but it's not like in a digital world, it's not like, you know, you receive the seller's pack and your trust in the seller's pack is because it's come from the seller's solicitors. If it had an office copy going back a few years now in there, how could you tell that was from Land Registry? Well, because it was sent to me by, you know, a firm representing the sellers. It's not that it had a watermark or a kind of wax seal on it. It's just that it came from the seller solicitors, and that's how I trust it. Actually, there's even better ways of doing it these days, which is I can go back to the source, right? So in digital terms, if Land Registry can provide me with an instant check that this is actually, you know, what the title says, then there's nothing more authoritative than that, and it is completely guaranteed. Of course, that's what we're here to do. That's, you know, what the Land Register does for the property market. It makes sure that people don't have to worry about who they're dealing with, because that's a matter of guaranteed truth. And on the hacking side, I think what the information that is then used in the transaction, that should be sort of publicly available information. So it's only what you need to protect is the ultimate source of that. And I can assure you that is one of the things that we always pay the closest attention to, making sure that we have a single source of the truth. There may be versions and copies out there and being used in transactions, but there is that rock solid register that is behind an awful lot of security that is constantly being checked and tested and updated. So the very best of our expertise in the UK is always being applied on making sure that is super secure.
But if we accept, Mike, that one of the delays around conveyancing in terms of information would be the local search, and that hopefully is something that the Land Charges project is addressing. Well, if we can download official copies and title plans and copy documents at the drop of a hat, every transaction, if we can get enviro and drainage searches within hours, if not a couple of days, if the local search process is speeding up, well, every time a property changes hands, we need a new property information form and a new fittings and contents form. So I'm just not convinced, the information bit of the process isn't the thing that's probably causing the delays in conveyancing. I mean, Stu, you and I remember that conveyancing, it probably took, 6 to 8 weeks when we first qualified.
I suppose it did, but I'm still not convinced that the time that a conveyancing transaction takes is measured correctly. And I still think there are too many stats out there that take the amount of time it takes to actually buy the property, not do the conveyancing. I think there's a distinct difference. And we talk about upfront information, but nobody ever seems to sort of talk to, home buyers and actually what do they want to know. And I feel that the way upfront information is being portrayed at the moment, it's just simply additional form filling. Lorraine's quite right. What upfront information do we need? Well, it's not just what a client completes. There's information from search companies, and we spoke about lenders, or we hinted on lenders earlier. We may receive a mortgage offer. The mortgage conditions state that we need the searches. The mortgage conditions may state that a client has to go and do something, and then we may have to wait a week in between exchange and completion to receive money. So trying to compile all that, for example, into the Norwegian model of 3 weeks would be impossible. It would need, such a cultural change from all different parts of the profession to make that happen. And I think simply additional information and forms, although it's helpful, isn't the silver bullet that I think everybody makes it out to sometimes be.
I can see that. I guess what I'm saying is it's necessary but not sufficient, right?
Yeah.
I think without it, you are always, and without it being complete as well. There's no point in 50% of it being, digitally immediately available, because then you're still, you're dictated by the slowest part of the information gathering process. I think the other part is, sort of reaching a tipping point, I guess, when people are all using systems that can talk to each other and are all using paperless processes. I mean, I'm interested in your views on the degree to which, digital ID checking as a kind of paperless and more secure way, as we've encouraged through our standard, is that getting towards being the majority, or will it tend towards being the universal approach? And also electronic signatures. Is this, there's so much of what we do in, particularly when we're engaging in financial services or even medical services, I've noticed recently, where, they have adopted completely, paperless ways of, identifying who you are and signing off on stuff. We're fully encouraging of that, and working with, there's a thing called the Digital Property Market Steering Group, which is there to bring everyone together to make sure this works, not just for residential, but also for commercial. And the reason being that if there are people, there are professions, there are ways of working, lenders, etc., systems that sit over both those sectors. And if you don't try and solve and make progress on both at the same time, the other's going to hold the one that's trying to progress back. So you do need to kind of push those both forward. So we're talking to them about how you make sure that we, have a way of adopting digital ID checking that means you only have to do it once, and whoever's the first to do it in the chain does it in a way that satisfies everybody, the lenders and land registry, etc. So how do you? I know you're supposed to be interviewing me, but how do you think that's going?
Well, I think there's never been so many options now when it comes to digital ID checking.
Right.
But I do think there's a bit of confusion as to sometimes why we do certain things, and particularly maybe around the safe harbour standard, and what happens when we're using ID that maybe doesn't include the passport. But there are now so many options when it comes to sort of ID checking, and I think there's a definite distinct difference now between your obligations and or checking AML as opposed to ID checking. But there are so many things now that you can use to aid that process, that I think that the subject in general has become highly complex, and profiling a client and your KYC has become even more onerous for conveyancers because of the expanding amount of information there is on a client. So it kind of goes hand in hand from a practical way.
I mean, the biggest thing the government could do, Mike, if you want to take this forward as a banner, is remove, much of the AML responsibility that law firms have just sort of seemingly been willing to take on. Because actually, I've been teaching conveyancing for years, and the single biggest impact on the process in terms of risk and time is actually the AML checks. They're the things, and the source of funds and source of wealth checks. They're the things that actually take the enormous amount of time at the beginning of the transaction when a conveyance is instructed. And again, as Stu alluded to, it seems that our colleagues in other parts of the world just don't exercise the same degree, or don't have the same degree of responsibility that we do. But I mean, I would say, to pick up Stu's point, Mike, that actually, and you've alluded to it, again, from my perspective, from the outside looking in and having been doing this for a very long time, one of the key positives, but on the other side, at the exact same coin, the biggest negative is actually the fragmentation of prop tech. So many prop tech companies, understandably, to be fair to them, have come into the market with their game-changing prop tech products. And as Stu said, there are so many different bits of prop tech that you can use to essentially do the same thing. And as you've said, Mike, they don't talk to each other, and they're not going to, because they've all got their own commercial interests to protect. And again, electronic signatures would be another great example, wouldn't it? I mean, the Land Reg, you've set out your requirements in Practice Guide 82. Quite rightly, the Land Reg can't endorse any one, a prop tech provider that allows electronic signatures to be added to documents, and therefore we've got a large number of them, and it's that fragmentation, I think, that's one of the big issues and one of the big barriers, frankly. And again,
I understand that, and I think it's a maturing market, isn't it? I think it felt to me, this is a crude caricature, but it felt to me 5 years ago that there was a widget for quite a small bit of the process. And now there's more of an aggregation of the widgets, so that the software offering is more, I can help you with the process of buying and selling property if it's residential, and that combines a number of things like ID checking and signatures and the like. So I think the way the market is evolving is helping. I
think there's a balance on that, Mike, though. You use the word process, and I think part of the problem, though, is that a lot of the tech is making conveyancing a process, and that is massively reducing skill set. And there still needs to be a certain amount of due diligence that somebody can apply to a conveyancing transaction. At the moment, we're not in a position where a computer can do the whole thing. And it is this conceived position that it is just a process that often causes a lot of the problems with clients and other entities that feel it takes too long, for example.
And it's people making the biggest investment of their lives. It's an emotional investment. The one document that most buyers are interested in, Mike, isn't the title, it's not the covenants, it's the fittings and contents form. What am I going to get? And let me start thinking about where my settees and curtains are going to go. And I think actually a lot of that, and that process needs people, it needs conveyancers at the heart of it to have those conversations and to deal with those emotions. And I think a lot of people forget that.
Well, I couldn't agree more, and I think there's a sort of there's a specific confidence in ownership point to that, which is simply having a data process that leads to information being handed to Land Registry and then put into the register, is to completely misunderstand how things work. You can make a digitally efficient version of how things have always worked, but you need to recognize, in doing that digitally efficient process, that there are moments of responsibility and advice that people need on that journey. You just described how it's super helpful if I'm assisted in my job as a lawyer in gathering information and understanding it, but then I've got to say, I now know what you're buying, but I need to check with you and help you understand whether it's actually what you want to buy. Right? That's the role of a lawyer, right? Just to sort of interpret the information and say, tell me what's in your mind, what's in your expectation of what you're buying here, and I'll tell you whether that's what you're getting. And if not, we can do something or change our minds. And the same goes for the kind of land registry, land registration process, not land registry process. The land registration process is, don't just we don't just need data from your system. We need to know what has happened, and that is true. We can validate some of that information ourselves, which is, what we're doing increasingly by making sure that the forms check the information. But we also need to know from you the things that we don't know. Are you sure this is the seller? Did the transaction actually happen? Is what you're sending us bits of paper or actually deeds? So, you were witness to the transaction. So just sending us information is, and it's the same principle really, is not enough. We need people to go, yep, I assure you that is true. So, we need to make sure that assurance and confidence in the process is maintained, and that the digitisation just is oiling the wheels of what should happen, not replacing them, if that makes sense.
Well, Mike, you mentioned electronic signatures. I mean, something actually, shameless plug, that's reasonably close to my heart because I wrote a little book about it, but that's beside the point. But the lenders, Mike, lots of conveyancers would be pointing out that most lenders, again, for their own reasons and probably quite understandable ones, to be completely fair to them, don't appear to have warmed to electronic signatures on mortgage deeds. So I guess there's two questions, really. Is that moving along? And perhaps more widely with the Land Reg, is the Land Reg sort of liaising with lenders more broadly to keep the lenders, I know you do, obviously, but to keep the lenders up to date, so the lenders see that Land Registry delays are an issue for registrations, not the conveyancer. So I guess there's two questions there: electronic signatures on mortgage deeds and that wider issue.
So we have, as you know, Lorraine, because you're part of an industry forum where we talk to the industry more broadly, but we also have we speak to a lender community which is sort of representative, has lots of the high volume lenders, but a broad spectrum of the other lenders too. We meet them in person and we keep them up to date, and through that, we've been able to provide them with much more information on, as they've been requesting, much more information on where their applications are, because ultimately they're, just like the buyer, they are also a customer of the law firm and also a customer of Land Registry. It's their ownership, if you like, of the mortgage on the registration that they are entitled to understand. And the feedback I've had from them is that's been, I think one of the largest said, game changing in terms of the amount of follow-up that they could take out of the system, because they just got it from the horse's mouth, as it were, as to where applications were. So that I think has hopefully, for I know it's the experience has not been entirely symmetrical, but I know that a lot of law firms as well fed back and said, yeah, that's taken a lot of heat out of the system. So I think that's been good progress. Yes, we do talk to them, as I'm talking to you now, about all the things that we are both dealing with today, and projecting in terms of speed of service, but also we talk to them about how we can work with them to make the process simpler. And digital signatures is a good topic, right? Because if they rightly say, well, we worry about security, there's a lot of money at stake, and we say, well, so do we actually. It's because we guarantee £8 trillion worth of property. So at least that should hopefully give you confidence that it's worth looking at, and we continue to kind of talk to them, both their sort of risk advisors, lawyers, and their technologists. So and I do think there are a couple of things around the corner that could make this easier to sort of understand and adopt within the sector. And the principal one is, I forget the precise name of the bill, because it was coming before the election and it's re-emerged after the election. But there's going to be a identity trust framework under a bill that is going through Parliament at the moment, under the Department for Science, Innovation and Technology. And through that, we will be able to create a scheme for the property market where people who provide digital ID checking can say, I meet the scheme requirements, and you, Stu, and your business can say, okay, so if I know, and this is all tested and checked by a regulator, if I know you meet the property market scheme requirements, then that ID check I know will satisfy the lenders, the Land Registry. So instead of having to lift the bonnet and look under liability and complexity of what goes on and the choices and, do I want to choose this supplier or this supplier? Actually, that becomes a darn sight easier, because if you comply with the scheme, then from your point of view, from a business point of view, oh, okay, well that's going to work for X, Y, and Z organizations and my compliance requirements. So I think that, and the Digital Property Market Steering Group's work on finding with the Open Property Data Association, finding a common data standard so that systems can talk to each other, also promises that ability to get systems working with each other, sharing ID, using electronic signatures in different parts of the system that enable people to feel confident in using them. All of which is quite technologically complex, but from a user experience point of view, actually could be super simple. That's always the way with the best technology. Actually makes it super simple for the user, and I can and more secure as well. That's it's really important to understand that digital ID checking, qualified electronic signatures, which we want to encourage coming in, those are actually not just easier, they are significantly more secure.
So, Mike, having sort of talked about digitisation and the benefits of digitisation, just maybe in brief, most practitioners will now be aware, of course, that the Land Registry appears to be rowing backwards in terms of first registrations, because, of course, you've gone back at the tail end of last year, Mike, to asking for original title deeds for first registrations, which, of course, perhaps appears to be sort of flying in the face of everything being electronic or certified copies. So, what's the rationale for that, Mike? Can you enlighten us at all?
Yes, I mean it's not really digitisation, because of course once the deeds are in, the first registration takes place, then the deeds are then scanned and immediately digitally available, and obviously the register is digital. But it was really we did a review when we consulted with customers, because it wasn't working very well at times. It was kind of too often the scans weren't clear. There was quite a high rate of missing our requirements that mean that we would need to go back and ask for a further copy. And when we talked to customers, it was quite a substantial majority just said that they were quite happy to go back to just supplying the original deeds or neutral about it. And quite a few customers were processing things that way anyway, sending us the original deeds. So it was really just trying to find a sort of singular, simpler way of making that bit of the process efficient. It will ebb away, obviously, first registrations anyway, as we. I mean, where are we? How many years after the last compulsory area? So
1990, rather boringly. So there you
go. So there you go. I mean, life being finite, sadly, means that in terms of homes, at least, there will come a natural end relatively soon.
Yes, it's certainly a dying art, as in practice, Mike, which obviously gives its own problems. But Stu, probably to finish off this fascinating chat with Mike, I think you've got the political doozy to finish off with.
Yeah, so slightly off piece from digitalisation and everything like that. One question I did have for you, Mike, and I completely appreciate that this could be a whole nother show to chat about, but just, initial brief thoughts. The government seemed to have such an appetite to abolish leasehold and, in their words, make common hold the default tenure. And to us, it just seems crazy. And again, the cultural change, we've used that word already, but the cultural change that would be needed to do that seems enormous. And I just wonder what your sort of, brief thoughts on that subject were.
Well, it's not just this government. There was the prior government as well. Very keen on addressing leasehold. I mean, my personal thoughts are that this is a trend, isn't it? If you look at the increasing enfranchisement rights over several decades, actually, it is all been in the direction of giving the people who actually occupy the property the control and responsibility for making the management decisions about the property. So common hold is not well known. We know that because there aren't many of them, and certainly we don't process many of them. So the thing that we will be doing is working alongside the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government very closely, and supporting them in finding the best way of devising the changes that they want to make, both to the kind of the property law, if you like, of common hold, but also the way of introducing it. We have some people in Land Registry who understand common hold. I'm not
Keep
sure
hold
there are
of
many
them, Mike.
people.
Keep hold of them.
Yeah,
Give
but it's
them a
also
raise.
it is also an opportunity as well, right? Because if we get to redesign the way common hold works, then we can design it in a way that makes it simpler to create and process. So very keen that as the government moves through the gears in their ambition here, that we work really closely with the sector and find a way of getting what government wants out of the change, which is that enfranchisement with a small e, if you like, in a way that just makes it easier for people to work with not only the process of buying and setting them up, but actually managing them thereafter. Something that is very deliverable and really helpful to people is what we can create here. And I do completely understand, though, that there is a hump of sort of reminding ourselves of what common hold was, and then and learning it as we go. But I don't think that's going to be it's not completely alien, is it? Because it's a variation on a theme of how leaseholds are structured.
I think the two big things that need to happen, as Stu said, we could probably talk about this till lunchtime, but clearly bringing the developers along, the big developers, because my personal view, for what it's worth, is that their lack of appetite for common hold the first time round is probably why it died a death. But of course, and this, I suppose, is a semi-political point, actually, the regulation of managing agents. I think actually, people who live in blocks, whether they've got a flat or a unit, still going to need a managing agent. And I think lots of lawyers in the sector, Mike, would think that actually it's the managing agents that actually do cause a lot of the concern, shall we say, and whether I think they're managing a common hold block or a leasehold block actually is slightly irrelevant in that sense. So maybe that's a comment that we can get out there. But well, look, Mike, it's always completely fascinating to talk to you, and Stu and I are incredibly grateful for your time, aren't we, Stu?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we really appreciate you coming on, taking the time out of your day to, have this chat and basically get this information out to the conveyancing community.
Well, look, it's my pleasure. Thank you for your time, because this is part of what we're here to do. We serve you and your clients, and your customers. So that's maybe come back to a conversation on common hold when we know more of the shape of that, and and there are leasehold reforms, and there's all sorts of things. But just, I guess, leave with our top message, really, which is we know that speed of service is the most important thing. It is what we spend 95% of our time and our energies talking about and investing in. So and as I said right at the beginning, we are confident that we have the right skills and capacity now to drive that age of the oldest case down, and our forecasts that we're really confident in see that accelerating. So look forward to your feedback later in the year, but hopefully it will be that you see that progress yourselves.
Oh, well, thanks so much for joining us, Mike. Thanks for your time. Take care now.
Thank you.
Take care, guys.
Bye.